All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This is like this is my first recorded session. So it is not live, but you can still have the opportunity of asking your questions and throwing your comments. I love it. All but I am here today. Oh, backing up. I did clean out the space and clear out my space because I have to start off centered. So I've already done this. But I did want to have this talk because it actually sparked um, out of a conversation that I had with my mother, and I reached out to my really good brother and friend and fellow activist on like many platforms to join us because it was, to me, it's fitting. um the topic that we're going to talk about is very fitting for this hour. And tonight's topic is, healing in the vein, the healing in knowing. I mean, and we've kind of already touched on it briefly with a few things and talking about a few other topics. But I do want to say, first of all, welcome. And if you can tell, the guests, a little about yourself and some of the things that you
Oh, some of the things that I do is a loaded question, but my name is Daniel Ferguson. I am from Greensboro, North Carolina. I have had the wonderful opportunity of experiencing a lot of different careers. I have to remind myself sometimes that I've done more in my lifetime than some people have in two or three, whether it be, touring internationally as a singer, with the work that I've done in activism from my childhood, marching uh, in to take down the Confederate flag off the South Carolina State Courthouse, to opening up a Broadway musical in Los Angeles, to being the lead of a wonderful organization, Smash, where I'm doing college and career coaching, helping to pour into the minds of the youth as they embark on their own career journeys. For me, I'm just privileged to share information. And thank you so much for having me
do.
today.
You're definitely welcome. Definitely welcome. And to kind of set the stage up a bit, because we've had a conversation on a little bit of we're why I've invited him. Let me put it that way. So in the power, or in the healing, I keep saying the power, so maybe it's supposed to be the power of knowing, but in the healing and in the power of knowing, um, what I mean is that when you don't know something, right, you continue on doing something in pain. You continue doing the things that you like they say, you don't, the person didn't know any better. So they were still doing things the wrong way until they knew better, right? Um, and that's how you move in space, how you talk to people, like to health wise, love and relationships. You can go anywhere across the spectrum of, you don't, like, what you don't know can hurt you, can harm you, can destroy opportunities for you, right? But then also understanding that once you start to know something, there's a healing process that comes with it. And so, as this platform is, it's healing in the veins, right? Um, Healing takes place anywhere and in any type of situation. And so, I am going to go ahead and roll us on in. And so with Daniel, like, there was this moment in time, a recent moment in time for him, where he started to figure out and find out things about himself. Um, and for me looking on the outside in, um, I was just like so admired at how well he started articulating things about his process. at how well he shared with us and publicly shared, mind you, about some of the things that he was going through, you know, from the darkest moments to the lightest moments, and basically sharing his testimony on like himself. And he continues to do it. This isn't just like he did it and now he's not doing it. He continues to do it. And I told him, I was like, I admire you for this. Like, I love to see it. I love healing processes that happen. And so I'm not going to share his story, but I do want him to share his story. So I'm going to leave the floor up to you right now to share your story, your testimony, your victorious testimony. Yeah.
Ooh, so you know, I think you mentioned a lot of things that can go in a lot of different ways. But the two things that really stuck out, and I think I would like to focus and hone in on, is power and truth. There is power in your truth.
Yes.
And your truth will bring you power. It will make you to be empowered. There is and a colloquial saying, if you will, right? Some may say it comes from the Bible. But it says, and you should know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And so I'll say that for me, there has been a long time where I did not face my own truth, right? Head on. And in not facing my truth, I worked against myself. In not facing my truth, I worked against myself. And I guess the people are going to be wondering, what truth am I talking about? Right. So I know, I believe, in this particular case, one particular truth was one that I can say that for me, I didn't learn about until I was an adult. And perhaps that truth was hidden from me, right? That I was on the spectrum. Another word mentioned earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
So being on the spectrum and not knowing, growing up your entire life thinking this is something wrong with you, and not quite being able to put your finger on what it is. You talk to people, you try so hard, and it becomes so very difficult to connect. There are different levels to it, I have to say. And people, well, first, let me also, because I know this is recorded and maybe somebody may have a question. He said he's on the spectrum. What does that mean? What spectrum are we talking about?
Right,
Right? It's lots of different spectrums. And I might exist on all of them. But
right.
in this particular case, talking about autism spectrum disorder, um, which for me, I at a very early age was diagnosed with something that used to be called Asperger's syndrome, which is a very high functioning form of autism, but not in a way that is extremely debilitating. It just a lot of cognitive disorder, a lot of social and emotional hindrance, I'll say. For example, I used to describe myself, and to an extent still do, as being 7, 17, and 70 all in the same body. um, and at any given time, right? I might be one of those things and not really, in some cases, cognizant of which one I am, right? um I still have moments where I might forget I'm in a crowd of people and start singing to myself, where I might start, you know, spinning around, because why not? It amused me at the time. And then at other times I may walk into a room and, even no matter the age of the people in the room, it's somehow I became the oldest person in the room, the wisest person in the room. A thing I was always told is that I'm an old soul, and at the same time, I was told how immature I was, how I played too much, how I did too much, how I talked too much. Um, and in hindsight, I realized that even the talking too much was, perhaps me fixating on an idea or a conversation or something that I wanted to share with people, and I just really was passionate and cared a lot about it. Um, and so these are only a few ways I have to say that being on the spectrum is expressed. A thing that happens is that a lot of people think that somebody who is autistic presents a particular way, that they have to present this particular way.
Right.
Um, and ultimately, again, it is a spectrum, you know. Some people may present this way, and you know, that's just how they present. People may present another way. There's a there's an expression my mother used to say, is probably very outdated. Um about people on the spectrum, and I'm sure she meant it affectionately, and I'm going to say it about myself, not about anybody else, right? But she used to call it being an idiot savant.
Okay.
you know where it's like a person may not quite be apt or adept in other areas, but in the ways that they are, they supersede their peers. um and so, there's that aspect, right? But then that's also kind of damaging, because then the expectation is that if somebody's on the spectrum, all of a sudden they're a mutant, as if this is the X-Men, and they may have mental powers, and there's this, this expectation to be super and great in everything that you do. And truth be told, ultimately at the end of the day, we're all bound by some sort of human limitation, or the limitations of our physical selves or mental selves or emotional selves. And usually when it comes to being on the spectrum, it all kind of falls down to the limitations emotionally. Um,
Yeah.
and so going back, because I will pontificate, you talking down this thread. This is about understanding your power, accepting your power, and that power being revealed to you through truth. I started by saying that I did not know that I was on the spectrum. And for me, I didn't learn until I was in college. Um, there, I remember the first time I heard the word Asperger's. Um, I, um, it was being used for someone else, right? And at the time they took the word and, kind of picked on the person who, they were saying. And I remember like just looking it up because I didn't know what it was. I was like, ha ha ha. At first I was like, oh, that's so funny. And then I looked it up and I was like, that's interesting. I was like, that sounds a lot like me, but I didn't really pay attention to it at the time, right? And then I remember in college, I was in a Spanish class, and ironically, we're having this conversation right on the advent of April, which is Autism Awareness Month. Um, and so in the Spanish class, it was April, and my professor actually had or has a son who was also or is also on the spectrum. And so she was trying to educate everybody about autism in the class. And I remember raising my hand and saying, well, I identify with all those things. And then she said, yeah, but I thought that's because you are autistic as well. And I was like, what? And she's like, you didn't know? She was like, that's part of why I'm doing this, because I saw it in you and you remind me so much of my son. And I was like, And I remember feeling so self-conscious and and at the same time a little bit mind blown, right? Because I was just like, what do you like that what huh? What do you mean? I'm what? Like how does that work? Um and so I had a conversation with her after class and she was like, she basically said, if you have not been diagnosed, you should probably go get screened. So I remember I got back to my apartment and I called my mother and I said, Mom, this teacher said that I'm autistic. She said, Yeah, you are. I was like, What? um
Um,
and so I was like, What do you mean? And so she explained to me, the great lengths I'll say that she went to keep it a secret even from me, right? Down to the schools that I attended. Um, and in hindsight, having conversations with teachers from middle school and high school, they all knew, and it still blows my mind that so many people knew and somehow I never knew. um and it's crazy how some things make more sense and at the same time things make less sense. Because it's you hear these things and and you're just like, what is going on? How come I didn't know? Why did no one tell me? So many questions I had, but I think that's a good place for me to stop because I will continue talking. So
yeah, I did write 3 points. Well, one, I'll start off with the last point because I often on this channel in this space talk about how secrets heal. Um, you know, because it's that thing in not knowing and then falling into the trap because you didn't know, or falling into spaces um that you shouldn't have because you just didn't know. Um, and I mean, luckily for you, I would not just say luckily because things happen for a reason, right? We all know, like, we can't determine our path, but your path led you that way. But I think it goes to show, and for any parent that's watching, don't keep things from your children. Like, explain
oh, please don't.
things, you know.
Yeah. For me, and I'll say this, I was blessed to have the mother that I had in that way because she
Yeah,
knew.
yeah.
Um, and what she did for me was that I think she well no, not I think I know she told me. She did research into ways to help modify behaviors, ways to do things, ways to show me how to understand things. Even down to how I was punished and reprimanded. My mother, I'm not gonna say I didn't get spanked because I did. I'm not going to advocate for spanking either, right? but um, but what my mother did in most cases was it just explained to me what happened, why it was wrong, how things should be done differently, you know? And in so much, she helped me to develop a code for me to navigate spaces and navigate life. Now, here's the thing. I wish, I wish that I would have known sooner. Because a lot of the anguish I had growing up, the inability to connect with my peers, um, you know, wanting so badly to be able to express myself and just not having the words to do so. Um, Down to like my mother used to tell stories about when I was a child, and I never said I'm sad or I'm feeling bad. I would sing, and that was it. You
Wow.
know, like I didn't. And it wasn't even like I would sing, oh, I'm sad. It was like I would find a song that reflected the emotions that I was feeling, and I would sing that song. Like there's an old TV show. I don't even remember the name of it, if I'm honest, right? But it had puppets. That's all I know. So, but they had a character on there named Boney, and Boney was like a dinosaur, with blonde hair and a backwards cap. But and I don't know why I remember that. At any rate, Boney used to sing a song that said, I'm Boney, leave me alone, right? And so I used to sing that song when I was feeling bad and I wanted people to leave me alone. I didn't just say I want to be left alone because I didn't know how to say that. I didn't even know that what I was doing was bad, right? And so I grew up with people saying, "Oh, he's annoying because he just keeps singing." But for me, music and singing was my first language. That was how I knew how to express myself. And so I felt so isolated because, the way that I knew how to communicate was rejected, and nobody was ever explained, or I wasn't even able to explain that the reason that I communicated in that way was because of my autism. So it led to an experience where ultimately I was isolated with my thoughts, my feelings, and my emotions, from my peers, from my family members, from anybody that I might have connected with, just from not knowing.
Right. And then I thought the other 2 points I thought was interesting is your professor calling well not well bringing it to your attention and the way that she did it. I think is important because there can be some people that are just blunt, you know, and it's just like whoa, like hold on, like now I feel threatened because you're not only are you bringing this to my attention, but the way in which you did it, it's like okay, hold on. And I remember even myself, I at some point in time, some in one point in time, I was an after school teacher, and one of my students was on the spectrum. And so my lead teacher asked me, she said, "How do you feel about this?" And I was like, well, I don't know. I've never taught a child, but hey, let's go with it. And I really want to say his name because I know he's older now, but I'm gonna keep his privacy. But
Yep.
he was one of my smartest students. I remember having a conversation with him, and before we would have recess, we made sure that the students got their homework done first. And whoever was done, then one of the three teachers that was present would take the students outside, and then the others would join accordingly. And I remember one particular day, I asked the students to call me Mr. B. And he said, "Mr. B, I don't want to do my homework." And I was like, "Well, you have to do your homework. Like, that's the rules. Like, and until you do your homework, you can't go outside and play because I know that's what you really want to do." And he's like, "Yeah, fine. Okay." So he takes his books out. In less than 5 minutes, he completes his homework. And I thought he was pulling my leg because he did like to play jokes. I would say that. And I looked at my lead teacher and she was like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "This kid just did all of his homework in less than 5 minutes." And it was right. And she said, "Are you serious?" I said, "Yes." It blew my mind. And I was like, wow, like and you kind of stated it earlier, like some people can have so many negative things towards people on the spectrum, not knowing that people on the spectrum, in my opinion, are highly intelligent. Just because they communicate different does not mean that their brain does not work. I mean, and to highlight some things, people, he stated his resume before he talked about any of this. How many of us can say that we have been in some of those same spaces and have been awarded the opportunities that he said? Like it to me, it shows your creativity, your brilliance. Like outside of that, it shows you like to your core. And I want to demystify the negative talks when
Yes.
we're addressing people on the spectrum.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that people on the spectrum have to be dealt with kid gloves. It's not that, right? It's not that, people on the spectrum require any sort of special treatment. It's a matter of just simply understanding that, and at the very base level, and not to be, or at the attempted not being reductive in what I say. Understanding that people communicate differently, you know, and just because someone communicates differently does not mean that they're not communicating, does not mean that they cannot communicate. It just means that they communicate differently. One of the binding traits, I'll say, of all people on the spectrum, um, and they're very it's interesting because the spectrum is so wide, right? And there's very few, I guess, things that bind everybody together, but one of them is hypersensitivity, right? um a thing that happens all the time. I can be with my friends, family members, what have you, and I may hear things that everybody else doesn't hear, right? And it's not like I'm hearing like metaphysical anything, right? I have really, really, really strong hearing. Like I literally
You
took
found a
a hearing test.
superpower. Uh,
Right, right, yeah. I'm a mutant. I'm an X-Men. Um, but yeah, no, I really, really strong hearing. So I recently did a hearing test. And they were like, most people test like in the 25 to 30 range, for these sound frequencies. They're like, you test at 0 to 5 because you hear them at almost zero, like zero volume. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And I didn't mention I was on the spectrum at that time because I was like, it didn't really, to me, it wasn't necessary. But, my hearing is really strong. My sight has always been very strong. As I get older, I like, and I say this very cautiously, that my vision has gotten weaker, but my weaker vision is still better than 2020. You know,
I believe.
um, and like my sense of touch, everything. So the thing, and what I'm trying to get to is that the binding trait across, the board with people on the spectrum is hypersensitivity, right? You feel, hear, sense, see, taste, touch everything so much stronger than everybody else around you. And so my theory, I'm not an expert, right? I'm not a psychologist. And so I'm not going to assert that I know, but my theory is that perhaps one of the binding traits also is hyperintelligence, right? But people who are lower functioning perhaps are more sensitive to those things than people who are higher functioning, right? Because at the very least, for me, if I hear something very loud, I can just be like, and like kind of, oh, can we turn that down? Like, like this is unnerving. Like, I mean, can sound be so strong that I get disoriented? Yes, right. But I can't imagine if I was, what they call low functioning, right? And I don't even want to say that because low functioning compared to whom, right?
Right,
Like
right,
what are we really saying? It's like basically saying that they are lesser than a person, and it's like no, perhaps their level of sensitivity is so strong that they just really can't deal, you know, and that still doesn't mean that they can't communicate. And so just I think the irony is that people try to say that when you're on the spectrum that you lack empathy, and it's not true. um, I will say that effective empathy is a bit more difficult, right?
hmm
If someone shows up crying, on my doorstep, I may not cry with them, and it's not because I don't feel anything towards it. It's more so I don't know how to respond to it, you know. I don't necessarily know exactly what to say. And so it doesn't mean that I don't have empathy. It means that I don't have strong, what they call affective empathy. But I understand very strongly if someone explains, this is what happened, this is why I feel this way, and this is what's going on. I understand, you know, and then, perhaps I can be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, how can I support you? How can I be there for you? Like, and so just understanding again, it's just an example of how people just communicate differently, and
Right.
understanding that is the best and easiest way to bridge that gap.
So now take us to the moment where you first found out and then accepted this, and like take us through like that enlightening period for you. There we go.
Ooh, okay. So the I smiled because I'm like, how do I make that story short? Because that's definitely not a short story. So for me, again, I expressed that I learned about it in college, but the journey to acceptance, I'll say probably didn't happen until maybe last year, maybe a year and a half ago at best. Um, After I learned in college that I was on the spectrum, I mostly denied it. Um, Not that I was, trying to avoid necessarily, but I didn't want to believe that it was something that would inhibit me. I didn't want to believe that it was something that could hurt me. And I won't say that being on the spectrum has hurt me, but what I will say is that not accepting that I was on the spectrum did. Um, because I would walk into spaces and try to find every reason under the sun, for every little quirk, every little thing that I felt, since believed, what have you, and try to figure out a way that that's why it was, instead of just saying, hey, you know what? Actually, I'm on the spectrum. I process differently. And that's how I do now. Now I'm much more vocal about it. I'm much more like, hey, and I don't even have to say I'm on the spectrum all the time. I don't feel like um everything is for everybody to know, and it's not necessarily a hiding of the truth, right? It's like you must tell the truth, right? But also understand that some people, for whatever reason, good, bad, or indifferent, utilize information in a negative way, right? And they can weaponize it. Like, for example, if I walk into a room and I say, an autistic person walked into the room, the immediate thought, actually, and for the people watching, right? I'll just say, what is your immediate thought? It's a point of reflection, right? If somebody told you that somebody autistic walked into a room or they came into a room, right? Because in some cases, there are people who are on the spectrum and they are not able to be mobile. They're not able to mobilize themselves. And so the thought immediately when you think of somebody who is on the spectrum, you think quote unquote handicapped, you think quote unquote disabled, you think unable, um, instead of thinking the possibilities. Because I think one of the best things and what has allowed me, um, or I guess you mentioned it earlier. You said you hear when I was telling my story, my resume, a creative person. A lot of my creativity is tied up in thinking outside of the boxes that were given to me, that were said, okay, this is the box that you're supposed to be in, and my brain immediately says, this is the box that you say that I'm supposed to be in, and guess what?
Already.
This is the box you didn't tell me I couldn't be in. you know and so in so much, I had a very, very, very rough time coming to acceptance. I'll say that. In 2021, there were so many things that happened to me. There were experiences that I had, altercations with people where I had what people will call the autistic meltdown, or and not really knowing how to respond. And so, in not knowing how to respond, I just got away because I didn't really know how to say, what to say, or um in former places of employment, things that um there were unspoken expectations that nobody shared with me, right? And so a thing about being on the spectrum is, you give a person on the spectrum the rules, they'll follow the rules to the T, right? Because those are the rules. But if you did not make a rule for it, the rule doesn't exist. And
Mm-hmm.
so everything that you didn't say for a person on the spectrum, the thought is, okay, well, that's fair game, because I'm not breaking the rules. But unfortunately, for people that, and the term they say neurotypical people, right? People who are not neurodivergent. Um, that there are these rules that people don't speak, they don't write about, they don't share, they don't tell other people. There's nothing in the handbook for it, but the expectation is that everybody's following it, and for me, my question is, how do you people all know these rules? Because nobody told me, and I don't see why. Like, it's not something that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Like, it's not anything that should, be a thing, but somehow it just is, right? And so, that in 2021 threatened my, my employment, my livelihood, relationships that I've had, in dating, trying to just connect with people and meet people where they are, and figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. And ultimately, in dating, there is no supposed to be. You're supposed to be yourself, you know, and if you're privileged enough, it works for the person that you're with. Nobody told me that, and so it's like there's so many things that I just didn't know, and even down to um toward the end of the year, I got really sick. Um, and in me trying to just do things in the way that everything's supposed to be, it could have cost me my life, because I wasn't thinking, I was thinking, okay, well, this is the rules, this is what people are saying, I'm just going to trust it. And there's so many, it can be exhausting. It can be exhausting. And what I'm learning now is the power in just speaking to my truth, the power in understanding that in so many ways where I don't have limitations, that in some ways I do, and owning that and being okay with it, and saying, hey, this is the limitation of me, this is my boundary. And ultimately, I think that's where the healing part comes, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have that level of self-awareness where you can say, this is the boundary of me, this is where I'm able to show up, this is my capacity, you know and this is what I can do, and there may be some things that I cannot. And if that's not acceptable, I can be okay with it not being acceptable.
Right.
And not in a way where I'm being disagreeable or disrupting anything, but just knowing that, this person is not okay with it, right? But that doesn't mean that, what I'm doing is not okay, or that, that I'm wrong somehow or whatever, and to take ownership of things that perhaps do not belong to me, right? Because sometimes people will say, oh, you, and not allow for that space of saying, well, this is how this made me feel.
Right.
Right. One of the best things that happened to me, I'll say, in 2019, and I'm pretty sure I never talked about it with my therapist, but I'm pretty sure she picked up on it because of how she talked to me. I learned afterwards, one of the things with people who are on the spectrum is they call it cognitive behavioral therapy. It's utilized. And so um, I know that that's what she was doing with me, but she didn't tell me that was why. But she is the professional. Of course, she would know, right?
I
But
do.
I'll say, oh, go ahead.
I
What you
was
say?
saying not to cut you off, but and that's why I tell like I on this platform I tell people all the time it's important to let the professionals do their work. Stop
Oh,
trying to do
please.
it yourself.
Please let the professional do the work. Because ultimately, here's the other thing, right? It wasn't something that I shared with her, but as a professional, she might have not known if that was something I would have been okay to hear, you know?
Exactly.
Was she amazing at, catching me off guard and doing paradigm shifts and literally staring at me until it all processed and sunk in? Yes, that's exactly what she did. She would say, I would just be talking and talking and talking, and she would say this, and I'd be like, you know,
Uh,
but I am a big, 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 big advocate of going to therapy, having a therapist, a psychologist, to talk through things. Because I think that one of the biggest issues with people today, and this is across the board, not limited to just being on the spectrum, and to your point, is not wanting to deal with yourself, not wanting to deal with what you're actually going through, what you're actually experiencing. It's so much easier to displace that onto this, or this is why that is there. This is, when a lot of times it's just, I feel this way and I'm not dealing with it. And in psychology, there's a phrase called cognitive dissonance. And in short, it basically means when you feel a certain kind of way and you are trying to tell yourself with your brain that you feel a different way. But deep down in your heart
that's how
that
you.
you actually feel
Mm-hmm.
this one way. And so the dissonance is you trying to tell yourself that you don't feel something that you do feel, knowing that you feel it, you know? So if I can say anything, to cap all that off, please go to therapy. Please deal with yourself. Please be willing to face yourself. It's tough, it's rough, it hurts, it's painful, you know. But on the other end of it, on the other side of it, the healing and the empowerment of it is so worth it. There's an expression old folks used to say, lies have no legs, right? But the truth will always stand. And if we don't want to face those truths, then we are trying to stand on, um, like a facsimile of what you know is actually happening, what we're actually dealing with, who we actually are. And the reason we're not able to stand, the reason why our legs feel shaky is because we're not just standing on that truth,
Right.
because that is our power.
And thank you for one. um, as you was talking, I was writing a few notes, and even before I began, I pulled the scripture, so I'm gonna read that, because I was connecting, or what was happening in my brain was spirituality was connecting even with this conversation. And so it's a very famous scripture, Psalms 23, but this is verse 4. And it says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And I always think about how my mom and my grandmother used to quote this another old saying, God will protect the babes and the fools, right? And and it's like
Me, a fool. But continue.
it's like it's and again it's all in that knowing. And I said in this case, the shadow is not knowing. The shadow is in not wanting to face us, and not in the good great words of Michael Jackson, looking at the man or the woman in the mirror and facing what we've known or what we've seen this whole entire time. And it's like, how many times have we been in a predicament that could have been avoided, but we didn't know? And then even to the point of thinking about, I'm trying to see because I have two other things that are not spiritual but are very much connected. So I'll stick with the spiritual for right now. But I've been thinking about how I've had a lot of outside conversations with people about spiritual gifts, and then people saying, I have these spiritual gifts, but I don't know how to operate in them. I don't know how to work in them. So it's like they go out and seek how to do this and how do I do this, and oftentimes some of these gifts are not what people deem as Christian like. These are not gifts that the church talk about, and in some instances some of these gifts have been demonized, and it's like you're demonizing them because you don't have them, so you don't understand it. um, and some of them have not been talked about, secrets. Um, and because of that, now you have this person who's thinking there's something wrong with me. Uh, like nobody else is seeing what I'm seeing, nobody else is hearing what I'm hearing, but yet, this is very much present, and you kind of talked about that. And I was like, wow, like this is very similar. But whenever you come into spaces with people who have those same spiritual gifts, you begin to talk with each other and you can encourage each other, and you understand that no, you're not alone in this. That what you heard, you did hear. What you felt, you did feel. What you saw, you did see, because this is a gift that was awarded to you that you're now having to understand how to use and operate in. And that's not, to downplay what we're talking about here, but it's like I see so many similarities in like I said earlier, your testimony and spiritual gifts. And I'm like, it's empowering when you know that, because now you see yourself in a different light. You can understand why you have your quirks, why when certain people come in the room you may clench or turn your head, and you understand it better because you're able to understand who you are in your, as you stated earlier, authenticity.
Yes.
Authentically understand and grasp and love on and hold yourself.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
even to the point of when you was talking about your jobs, because now it's bringing back some of the conversations we used to have, right? And I was just like, oh wow, like yeah, like I remember this conversation. But even to the point about like with the job and understanding that. So whenever, and we even talked about this earlier, understanding that when some of our jobs don't understand some of our spaces, and when we're talking about the black lived experience, or I would just say people of color lived experiences, and understanding that, not all people have the opportunity, such as your mother, to understand what was going on, and knowing and having the resources to understand and say, hey, my child is going through this. I need you to work with me, and I will work with you so that my child can have a pleasant educational experience. And
Right.
that translates into a pleasant working experience. But when you don't
Yes.
have the resources, you don't get that.
I saw a meme recently um that said just to take a moment to reflect on how the majority of the people who have harmed you, the majority of people who have done you wrong, who, would disempower you, do not have the emotional age above a teenager.
I
You
believe.
know, and so in so much, what I've learned is that the science of projection is real. People who don't feel empowered want you to also not feel empowered. And people who have insecurities want you to also feel insecure. In so much, as we talked earlier about how, I felt isolated, how I felt, all these other things. People do things like that, I've learned, because they don't want to feel that. They don't want to feel isolated. They don't want to feel like they are the outcast. So they make everybody feel as if they are the outcast. They are the this, they are the that. Because if everybody feels bad, then we all can feel good. and
Mhm.
that's so horrible. I wish it was not the case. You know what I mean? Like, to me, I'm like, there's no reason why we should all have to feel bad, or that we should try to make somebody else feel bad because we do, right? The conversation about spiritual gifts in the church, we could talk about that for hours.
Y'all don't
And
understand. Like we literally can have this conversation for
hours. What I will say is that, and I can say this and take ownership of the statement, right? That if there are people who, may be watching this and they know what they know, they see what they see, and they feel what they feel, right? Um, if it is at all possible to not allow certain leaders, certain people who have made themselves to feel empowered, emphasis on have made themselves
come
to
on.
feel empowered, to disempower you, because and especially for my Christians, right? You hear the song, "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine." Well, it's another statement, right? If you have to dim somebody else's light so that yours shines, your light ain't so bright.
Right.
And some people might know themselves, right? And in knowing themselves, they know that their light is not so bright, so they want you to dim yours. And in so much, they are using their truth to empower themselves by disempowering you. So, so
Let that
um,
sink in. Let that sink in. If you got to rewind this video, rewind it, but let that sink in.
so um, what I will say, I'm not gonna say anything about anybody in particular. I'm not even gonna say that you need to put whoever that person is down. But what I will say is, in the same way that they are speaking power to their truth, you can do the same thing and speak power to your truth. And seek those, like, not in a way where you dismiss something that is counter to what you say, because especially when it comes to thoughts, right? I'm not going to say feelings. When it comes to thoughts, it's important that you have people around you who challenge your thoughts, but be very careful about people who challenge your feelings, because if they would invalidate your feelings, they would invalidate you. So I will say, if I had any advice, and this, relates back to autism awareness, right? Haha. If I have any advice, you should surround yourself with people who affirm how you feel, because you can agree with somebody or disagree with somebody about what they think and still affirm how they feel. That's important. If anybody has to, invalidate how you feel to validate how they think, they don't care about how you feel, and what they think is not so important. So I would say, definitely surround yourself with people who affirm how you feel. And in so much, you will find your space, and you will find the things, the places, the people that empower you.
Big poet speak. Definitely. Like, this is great and awesome. Thank you all for coming in and sharing this experience. Like I tell you all always, play this for your friends, your family, share it with someone that you know needs to hear this. Um, Reach out if you have any questions. I mean, I do know I do have his connection. So even if you have questions for him, I will definitely shoot them to him so we can get an answer. But the most important thing is understanding that your healing is powerful. It's empowering. It's more than just powering mentally, but it's empowering spiritually and physically in some cases, right? So we want to make sure that when we're addressing healing, that we're focused on the mind, body, and the spirit, because we're all one in that. We're, you know, um, like we have to take care of, as the good book says, our temple, right? And we can't take care of our temple if we're not addressing the things that could prevent that could what's the word? I'm sorry. Potentially, there we go. That could potentially disrupt our temples. So definitely, like this, it was a lot of wisdom. Like me, when we get together, it's always a lot of wisdom, and I'm like, dang, I wish I had recorded it. Well, I actually did this time. so, but it was a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge. And you know that the other good scripture is, "My people perish for the lack of knowledge." Where now you don't have to lack anymore because a lot of wisdom has been shared. So again, you all have a good night. Thank you for tuning in. And again, inbox me for those questions. And you all have a good night.